Welcome to The Board Ghost, our last best hope episode primer.
If living is a highway, then heaven is a bus stop. Been waiting for a minute there, but has it been forever?
So our last best hope was designed by Mark Diaz Truman. You can visit the publisher at magpiegames.com to learn how to purchase a copy for yourself. There's PDFs and a nice paperback edition of the game. They also have a couple expansions out as well, and I'll get into those later. So as described in their rulebook, Our Last Best Hope is about heroic sacrifice in the face of an impossible burden. So you play a team of people who have to risk it all to save humanity from a terrible crisis. And for reasons to be determined, you're the only ones who can do it, the last best hope. The game can be played collaboratively with no game master. It can be helpful to have a facilitator who has read or played the game before to help things moving along. Again, you can listen to this primer. We'll do our best to explain it, and we will probably do a behind-the-scenes video on our Patreon for some of our Patreon subscribers a little later on. And there's games similar to this that we've played before. Home by Dark has a very similar mechanic system. There's a few variations, but pretty similar. The game is structured to be played over the course of 2 acts and an epilogue. Play, you'll need about 3 to 5 players. Run time is 2 to 3 hours, depending on number of players and investment in the thing and how into making long scenes you are. So you'll need some writing utensils for everyone, a dozen 6-sided die in 2 color, some index cards, and a printout of the mission you're attempting. The rulebook has 3 missions: Zombie Apocalypse, Space, and Frozen North, with variations and options within each to allow you to make these missions unique even if you play them over and over again. There are additional missions available online and in an expansion book, and that's available at magpiegames.com, along with some other game variations. So the first thing you're going to do is mission prep. So you're going to choose your mission. So again, in the back of the book, there are a number of missions, and it kind of walks you through some of the pieces that you need to deciding those mission things. So it'll have lists of threats and lists of different crises that you can run into, and also some variations within the theme that you can use to tweak your play. What you're going to do is pick a captain and a supply officer, and you're going to assign those roles to 2 people. Basically, the supply officer is the one who is going to be doling out dice to people, and they may have a role in scenes later on too. And the captain is the one who goes first, sets up scenes first, and is actually the final sort of arbiter when it comes down to it, and decider of what happens, and especially in scenes that they're not involved in, or in scenes that they are involved in, it falls to them to make that call. The next thing you do is define the crisis, the response, and the plan. So these are all 3 different aspects of your story that require kind of saying like, hey, where are we at is what the mission says. Then you set up your setting of like, what is the story elements, and that's what the crisis is. So like, what are the threats that are going to destroy humanity? Then what is the limit is, why is this team our last best hope? Like what makes it so that the motley crew of 3 to 5 people are the only ones who can stop this thing from happening? And then lastly, what is your plan? How do you intend to stop this crisis? Like, it may not go this way, but what is the initial sort of thrust that you're going to take to get this all done? Next thing you do is just kind of set up your scene. So per player, you're going to have an event pool card, and you're going to put a black die per player on that event pool. So if you have 4 players, you'll put 4 black die on that, or 4 of one of your 2 colors. You're going to give each player 2 story points. So that's those are going to be like white die, and you're going to place 2 story points per player on the plan as well. So that is sort of, those are resources you can play. You can also play off resources off the plan, but those are like committed resources towards eventual success. Then you're going to each pick a role. The roles are like engineer, doctor, scientist, soldier. So you can have variation within your crew. Then you're going to introduce your characters. You're going to say why are you on the mission, what your names are, etc., kind of your defining features. Then you're also going to define your touchstone. Like, what is the thing that you left behind to go on this mission? And another touchstone is what you brought with you. What did you bring with you on this mission to sort of steal you towards your final goal? Then you're going to make your sane, crazy, secret, and fear cards. So you're going to take like 2 index cards, rip them in half, write sane, crazy, secret, and fear on each one. And then on each of those, write down which other player at the table makes your character feel sane, who grounds them, and then you're going to flip that over and keep that to yourself. You're going to write down which character at the table makes you crazy, which one just rubs you the wrong way, puts you on edge, makes it harder for you to succeed at what you need to do. Then you're going to write down what your secret is and what your fear is. And you're going to pass those two cards to the person to your left and right, respectively. So secret's going to go to your left, fear is going to go to your right. And those people will actually get to play those cards to complicate your scenes later on. Then everyone's going to define one asset that the team can use. So you do that per player. You can do that as a group, like talk about the assets you're going to do, or just have each person come up with an asset. So you make one of those per player. Then you're going to each draw a death card. There are death cards at the back of the book that just kind of say, like, you will die from X or Y. Like, you will die helping a friend. You will die refusing to pay a direct order. You will die when we least expect it. So you're gonna draw that card and keep it to yourself. You can also just kind of roll a die using the chart in the back of the book of like what those cards are. I think we rolled an 8-sided die to determine which of those 8 you want to choose. Then you keep that to yourself. That's going to be the death you can leverage later on to help in the success of the mission. Then you're going to actually make a threat card and pass it to the left. And so one at a time, everyone's going to make a threat card. And the first person to make the threat card won't know what the threats are, but eventually by the time it gets to the captain, everyone, like the captain will know what all the threats are. Then you're going to place those threats in the center of the table. Then you go into playing scenes. You have your grid. You have your laid out in front of you now. You have everyone's character, their roles, their names, why they're on the mission, what they're there, like what they're good at, how do they fit in this whole thing, their touchstones, what they left behind, what they brought with them, and their cards, their secret and fears are passed out, and they have their sane and crazies in front of them, and they have their 2 story points right now, and some points on the plan, and 4 points against you in the event pool, and a death card, and some assets, and some threats. So you got all that stuff. So now you go into Act 1 and playing your scenes in Act 1. So the first scene is the choice. This is sort of the opening bit of Act 1, where you roll some dice and consult the mimic. So the captain can kind of make the call in this, but in the mission, so you roll some dice to determine which complications come up. And you roll these dice to kind of see, like, are we running out of time? Or, is the direct route not a safe route, etc. Basically, the captain leaves you with, in the choice, the captain determines either rolling or consulting the mimic to give you an option. And in this option, you can say, hey, we can either just continue on the path as written, like take the plan head on, or we can take this diversion, which could help us at some point, or be good for us, or complicate things. But we need to make a choice, something that's going to complicate our path, but maybe make us feel better about the story at the end. So after you do the choice scene, each player gets a spotlight scene. So in your spotlight, you're going to pick one or more characters, and you outline what you want the scene to be about. And within these scenes, you want to try to use your sane and crazy. So you want to involve someone else in your scene that makes you sane, or involve someone else in your scene that makes you crazy, and play up into those reasons why, and then leverage it. And when you play it, what you do is you hand that to the supply officer when you've sort of activated that card in the scene by showing how they make you crazy or showing how they make you grounded and sane. And then the supply officer is going to give you 2 dice for each of those cards. And those can only be used once. So that's your pool of cards, is those 2. Plus you can play people's secret cards against them. So now the first player to the right who isn't in the scene should choose the threat. If everyone's in the scene, then the captain chooses the threat. When a scene reaches its climax, that's when you play the threat card. The first player to the left who isn't in the scene should play the mimic. If everyone's in the scene, the captain chooses the threat and the supply officer plays the mimic. So the mimic is like a computer that gives maybe not the most accurate details, but some information about the world. So it's sort of like a player-controlled GM. Anyone can take the reins on it, depending on, they're just out of the scene, but they're adding details and answering questions for the players. Like, is there a snowstorm coming? And the mimic can say, yes, there's a strong wind blowing from the west. That means blah, blah. Like, that's something the player can make up. It may not be totally true. Like, it may not bear out in the rest of the story, but it's what this computer is seeing at the time and what your fellow player is helping add to the scene. Even though they are like an outside player, you're asking them for assistance. You're going to go around the circle until there are 3 dice per player in the event pool. And you're going to add dice to the event pool over the course of the game, because as you resolve scenes, you're going to roll against the threat, and you're basically like taking the threat. That's where we get into this. So one character must take the threat, in that they're the one who's going to be the one heading it up. They're going to be rolling against the threat until it's resolved or that player dies. So threats in Act 1 start with 3 black die. So you're basically rolling your character's dice against those 3 black die. Threats in Act 2 start at 5. So things ramp up when you get into Act 2. All players start with 1 white die, and they get to add more by using their roll abilities and their assets. So every role, like engineer, soldier, scientist, has a different ability that they can leverage. Like the scientist can remove a black die from the threat when they're involved in the resolution. But they have to spend a resource to make that happen. They have to spend one of their story points to say, aha, I know the weakness of this creature. If you do this, then blah, blah, blah. And now you can roll 1 less die against you in that challenge, in confronting the threat. Other things you can do in terms of like confronting the threat is like spend story points to bring in an asset, or spend story points to bring in, you can bring in 1 player to help you, but then to bring in a 3rd player or 4th, each additional player basically costs a story point. So if you, let's say you wanted to use your power, wanted to use an asset, and wanted to bring in 2 characters, so the 1 free character and then the one you have to pay for, you're going to be paying 3 story points to do that, which means you hopefully have cashed in some story points to get those points, and you're going to be rolling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 die. I don't know, you're going to be rolling a nice handful of dice, but that's just for that 1 bit against the threat. You're going to have to keep going. So once all the die have been collected, you're going to roll them. You're going to add the black and white totals. Whichever is bigger becomes the effect. So if white is high, then you're going to tick off something from white. So for each 5 above or below 0, you're going to add an additional effect. So if any black 6s come up during Act 1, those go to the event pool, and that player is going to get 2 story points. So, and that doesn't cost against that player. So you're actually going to, like, it's a little complicated, but here's an example. So I roll 3 white die and 3 black die, right? And I rolled a 4, a 5, and a 1 on the white die, right? So that's a 10, okay? On the black die, I roll a 6, a 1, and a 3. That's a 10, but that black 6 automatically goes to the event pool. Now it's 10 white versus the remainder, which is 4 black. So 10 is higher, and that means it's going to, that's a total of 8. So that's going to tick 2 points, I believe, off of the threat. So it gets closer to reducing the size of the threat, meaning that you're going to roll that fewer dice when you get to that point. If you have 5 above 0, you're going to tick off that thing, and then when you roll again, you're going to take off 1 less die for each tick, for each white effect. So if you've done 2 positive effects against the threat already, you're only going to have to roll 1 more positive effect to win. And when you roll the die, you're going to just have to roll once to get to it. So black effects add harm to all characters who participate in the roll. So basically everyone's going to take a hit if they helped out and you aren't successful. If the roll is equal, you actually roll the event pool and add a new threat equal to any black effects. So in Act 1, you take all the die from the event pool and roll them, consult the consequence table to see what the effects of the choice are on the mission. In Act 1, you're playing against these threats. You're buying white die to go into the event pool. You can spend 3 story points to put every white 6 you roll against the pool. You're taking harm, which makes it harder to complete the thing, but also trying to tick things away and help each other out and pushing your luck and rolling more and more die. Then once you reach the end of Act 1, when there are a bunch of white and black die in the event pool, that's again 3 per player, you take all the die in the event pool and roll them. Then you check the consequences table, and that's going to see what the effects of the choice are that you made earlier on are to the mission. So whether you chose to go on to take the pass of that choice or not, you're going to learn what those effects are, and that's going to affect Act 2. Act 2 is very similar. You're going to put all the black die from the event pool on Crisis. These represent the level of the final threat, and you place the white die on the plan. These die can be used by any player for any role during Act 2. In the event pool, you have a 4-player game with 10 black die in the event pool and 2 white die in the event pool. Those 10 are going to go in the Crisis, and the other 2 are going to go in the plan. And from the beginning, remember, you had 1 die, so now you've gone from 4 to 6 on the plan. But the black die on the Crisis way outnumber the plan. So you can actually use the plan white die, but any player can use those during Act 2 to help them out in a scene, but that limits your successes later on. You also get 1 more scene in Act 2. So you're basically each going to play 1. Once those scenes have completed, any characters left alive, so you're going to play threats throughout each scene, they confront the Crisis. You're going to build a normal threat roll against Crisis die. You're going to just add all your story points together and put all the dice from the Crisis against your accumulated pool of dice. And you're going to also, like, if characters have died, you leverage those dice through. We'll get into that in just a second. And any characters left alive confront that crisis. They build that normal threat roll against a crisis die, and that they take all the crisis die versus all of their white die and roll them all together and see what happens on the crisis table. And so you see what that is, and that's your outcome, and you describe and play it out. Notes: if your characters are going to die from harm, that's when you can leverage your death card. You can use that to escape your threat. But before the crisis comes, before that end roll, you have to die according to the card. So you have to find a moment to do that. And when you do that, you get to add 2 white die to the final crisis roll. So you're going to make the crisis weaker by sacrificing yourself. But if you don't do that, if you don't die before the crisis, you're going to add 2 black die to the final crisis roll. If you have not played your death card but are about to die in a way that fits it, you may play the card as your die to add 3 white die to the final crisis roll. You're like, oh, I haven't died yet, which is really close to the end. I'm taking harm enough that, and this fits the way I should die. I'm just going to play this card right now and die and add 3 white to the crisis roll and make it easier for you to win the crisis. If you choose to die though without taking harm, you may play the card to add 3 white die to the final crisis and 2 story points to the plan. So even more so, if you aren't getting damaged, but you still choose to die, you get to add even more to the roll and more stuff to help out the people who survive. If your character is dead, you play a flashback scene on your turn if you still have turns to do. The threat at the end of the scene still occurs in the present, so that's still being dealt with by people in the present, but it's your character's in a flashback. And you can still kind of help out probably by having your character having in flashback mode given knowledge that helps out in the task. Playing story cards, Sane, Crazy, Secret Fear, get you story points, but fear cards also add a black die to the threat roll, so it makes it harder when you do that. So that's our last best hope. It's very similar to Home by Dark in that you build a grid, and then those pieces within the grid start to accumulate dice, and you're rolling against them as an individual and working together to add to your dice pool to fight that challenge. And that's our last best hope. So again, the basic setup is you are like a Armageddon style crew of humanity's last hope, going to stop some terrible cataclysmic thing from wiping everyone out, and you're going to put your lives on the line to do it, and you're giving up stuff to do that. So that's our last best hope. Again, you can find that at Magpie Games, and it was designed by Mark Diaz Truman. And there may also be an expansion that has some additional missions on Magpie Games website. Again, we have played our last best hope once so far. Hopefully we'll get more of them to the podcast and to the table. And one of these times, if you go to our Patreon, you can vote to see, if you are one of our patrons, vote to see if we will cover it in a video coming up down in the next month or two. But in the meantime, just let us know if this primer was helpful. Feel free to reach out with any questions. And again, thanks a lot. Get out there and play that game. This has been a Board Ghost primer for Our Last Best Hope.
Dying, don't agree with me.